birth. And that brings us to our breaking news. We're actually focusing on a tribute written by the Prime Minister to the former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee on his 100th birth anniversary today. We'll just read out a few excerpts for you, but then we'll be joined in just a few seconds by a reporter to tell us a little bit more. Some excerpts from that piece. He said Atalji understood Indian democracy and the need to make it stronger. He was a career and had a career spent largely in the opposition benches, but never carried any trace of bitterness against anyone. Because remember, Atal Bihari Vajpayee and the BJP were largely in the opposition through his career until he became the Prime Minister. That's what they're referring to. They were in opposition at that point to the Congress that was in power. He says he never carried any trace of bitterness against anyone, even though the Congress stooped to lows. That's what the Prime Minister has said in that letter. He's also said safeguarding the Constitution was all that mattered. Just listen into this and then we'll have a reporter join us.
पार्टी नेता हो, संसद सदस्य हो, मंत्री हो या प्रधानमंत्री, अटल जी ने प्रत्येक भूमिका में एक आदर्श को प्रतिष्ठित किया। एक कार्यकर्ता के नाते अटल जी के साथ कार्य करने का सौभाग्य मिला। अनेक स्मृतियां आंखों के सामने उभर करके आती हैं। अटल जी की जयंती के उपलक्ष्य में आज देश गुड गवर्नेंस डे, सुशासन दिवस के रूप में मना रहा है। गुड गवर्नेंस का मतलब होता है जब शासन के केंद्र में सत्ता भाव नहीं, सेवा भाव हो। जब साफ नियत से संवेदनशीलता के साथ नीतियों का निर्माण हो, हर हकदार को बिना किसी भेदभाव के उसका पूरा हक मिले। गुड गवर्नेंस का यही सिद्धांत आज हमारी सरकार की पहचान बन गई। हम अपना दायित्व निभाएं, अपने लक्ष्यों को प्राप्त करें। यही सुशासन और यही आज का दिवस अटल जी को।
All right, let's go over to our colleague Payal to understand some of the themes of the editorial that the Prime Minister has written in ode to the former Prime Minister. Payal, if you could tell us a little bit about the time in history in which Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee assumed office. It was a time that had quite a bit of political instability, a lot of transitions taking place. Just give us the context, because the Prime Minister has referred to him as the architect of India's transition into the 21st century. What does he mean?
Well, of course, it was a very, very difficult time. Like you said, politically, there was a lot of transition which was taking place, very unstable, political scenario in the country. But Atal Bihari Vajpayee stood tall. Even though he wasn't the Prime Minister for a very, very long time, but he in fact left his mark, not just as a politician, but also the way he conducted himself as a global leader as well. He was always said to be somebody who would take everybody along. He was somebody who would, take all factions along. Foreign policy, something which of course is very definitive of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee regime, especially with the kind of rub-ins that we had with neighboring nations like Pakistan. His deciding over the entire matter like statesman is remembered for a very, very long time now. And the Prime Minister, of course, Narendra Modi today, leading the tributes that are being paid to Atal Bihari Vajpayee. It's his 100th birth anniversary. It is going to be celebrated in a big, big way across the entire country by the BJP. They've sought out plans for the entire nation. And, it was this Modi government which actually brought in the celebration of this day as a good governance day, because that is exactly what Mr. Vajpayee stood for. So every year, the BJP holds programs. The Prime Minister himself will be paying tribute at the Sadaiv Atal style in a short while from now. After which, of course, he'll be heading to Madhya Pradesh to launch a series of projects there as well. To tell you essentially that, governance was the key that Atal Bihari Vajpayee stood for, and governance is the key that, Narendra Modi's government is also going to be remembered for.
Can you also touch on, Payal, because this is a theme that we'll be discussing through the day today, Atal Bihari Vajpayee's excellent relationship with the opposition at the time. He's someone who thought good relationships was perhaps the most important thing as a statesman. Can you tell us a little bit about how he maintained that?
Well, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was not just a great politician or a great statesman like we remember, but he was also a great conversationalist. So obviously, his poems also come to the fore when he said कि छोटे मन से कोई बड़ा नहीं होता और टूटे मन से कोई खड़ा नहीं होता, which means that you can't be a divided house and still be prospering as well. So his conversation, his ability to strike a rapport with the opposition parties actually made it much more easier than what the political scenario at this point in time really was. And even now, even till date, when the politicians of that time, when they speak up in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, they say that they miss the leadership of the likes of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Sushma Swaraj, Arun Jaitley amongst the others as well, especially Atal Bihari Vajpayee, because those were difficult times. Like I said, we had a run-in with Pakistan. The Kargil war was also, ensuing as well. But Atal Bihari Vajpayee was able to take everybody on board, was able to take everybody together, and that actually made the difference. That's the way it really was. And, it was, the Prime Minister makes a very important point in his tribute, saying that, he wanted to protect the Constitution at every cost. And remember, Constitution has been one debate which has been very, very pertinently discussed right now in the current scenario as well. And he, in fact, was very instrumental in giving an alternative to the Congress party, because the Congress party had been in power for a very long time. The Prime Minister Modi, Mr. Modi also had a long association with Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So he reminisces this is what he learned from Atal Bihari Vajpayee and what Atal Bihari Vajpayee actually stood for.
Payal, we'll keep connecting with you through the day and through the show today to understand more on this story. Let's go over to our colleague Pallavi, who is also with us to bring us context on the story. Pallavi, that one line from Prime Minister Modi's ode to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, where he's talked about the fact that right before the Prime Minister came into power, Prime Minister Vajpayee, right before he came into power, in those 9 years, you'd seen 4 Lok Sabha elections. But it's Atal Bihari Vajpayee who was able to, in those years and the years after, create a sense of stability. What were the keys to him being able to do that?
I think a couple of important points, and while he's obviously not openly talking about opposition in his obit and op-ed on a day like today, it's an important messaging also to the opposition parties. One is the kind of political stability that he was able to provide in terms of governance. He also calls him the architect of the present NDA, which means coalition of coming together of people with different points of view, and there was no tug of war. And thereby he was able to provide and take people along. And, is this a kind of a veiled attempt at the India bloc, which is being tom-tommed as a kind of a revival story? He says that, you run a coalition government does not necessarily mean that political stability doesn't come. And that is where Vajpayee's contribution really is to the fact that he created the NDA, but he also ensured that this was a coalition which took the country forward and not backward in terms of economic as well as political stability. It's a very key point. And, we all know, everyone who's gone through Vajpayee's political journey is aware of the fact that one of the biggest knack and ability he had, and it was a talent which even his opponents would accept and agree on, so that was the fact that he was able to ingest in seriousness, have different people take along with him. I remember the speech which he made inside the Lok Sabha when his government fell.
Right.
There was no rancor, there was no bitterness, but a sense of remorse and a sense of sadness, of course, because the government falls. Again, Prime Minister Modi has made a reference to that as far as his open is concerned. So these are the key takeaways: political stability, economic governance, several flagship programs. All of them has been the hallmark of the Vajpayee era.
Thank you, Pallavi, for illustrating that for us. Our colleague Pallavi and our colleague Payal are going to continue joining us through the day as we focus on visuals and tributes pouring in from all corners. Let's move on, though, from this story